You know that feeling when you get the offer and the number lands, and for a second, just a second, you think, okay, this might actually work. And then the first paycheck arrives, and it's not that number. It's smaller, quieter, a different number entirely after the taxes, after the deductions, after everything that gets taken before it even reaches you. And you sit there staring at it thinking, wait, that's what I'm actually working with? And then rent is due. And now you're doing that math again. The one you've done 100 times. The one that should add up and somehow never quite does. Not because you're missing something, because the numbers were never telling the same story. That's not a budgeting problem. That's not a spending problem. That's what happens when the number you agreed to and the number you actually live on have been two different numbers the whole time. And nobody in that negotiation room was required to mention it. Here's what nobody tells you about people who feel broke on a salary that sounds fine. They call you bad with money. You're actually someone who was handed a gross figure, built your expectations around it, and then discovered that the net, the number that actually has to survive contact with your real life, was something the offer letter never bothered to introduce you to. And financially irresponsible? That label assumes different choices would have produced a different outcome. But for a lot of people, the math doesn't fail because of the choices. It fails because of the arithmetic. The rent is the rent. The salary is the salary. And the distance between them has been quietly growing for long enough that it now swallows most of the paycheck before anything optional has been touched. Here's the thing. There's actually a name for the gap between what a salary sounds like and what it does. Economists call it wage illusion. The tendency to evaluate your financial position based on the number you were told rather than what that number can actually buy in the specific city at the specific moment in history where you're trying to live. And here's where it gets concrete. An economist named Lawrence Katz spent years doing something almost nobody wants to do. He put wage growth and housing costs side by side, city by city, decade by decade. Not to write a think piece, because he genuinely wanted to know where the money was going. What he found was that in most major cities, real wages, what the salary actually buys, have been declining even as the nominal number kept going up. The number looked like progress. What the number could purchase was quietly shrinking. And the gap between those two things is where most people's financial stress actually lives, not in poor decisions, in arithmetic that stopped working before anyone noticed. But then there's something else happening here, because the salary wasn't just a number, was it? It was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to be a signal about where you'd arrived, what you'd built, what kind of choices you'd have from here. A good salary was supposed to mean you could plan without your hands shaking, book the flight without calculating for 3 days first, have a bad month without it becoming a crisis. And when it doesn't do that, when it covers the basics and then basically stops, it doesn't just disappoint financially. It disappoints at a different level, because you're doing everything right and the math still isn't cooperating. You got the salary. You showed up. You made the thing work. And somewhere between gross and net and rent and utilities and the loan that doesn't care what kind of month you had, the version of financial stability the salary was supposed to represent just didn't materialize. Have you ever felt embarrassed telling someone you're stressed about money because the salary you make is one they'd consider more than enough? That gap between what it sounds like and what it feels like to actually live on it. That's not in your head. Now here's where it gets interesting. Remember the first time you actually sat down and did the math? Not in your head, properly, on paper or open in a tab you kept minimizing because you didn't want to look at it directly. You typed in the salary. then the rent, then the utilities, then the loan payment that auto-drafts on the 3rd of every month, whether you're ready or not, then the insurance, then the subscriptions you keep meaning to cancel but haven't. And then you looked at what was left, and you checked it again, because it couldn't be right. And it was right. That number at the bottom, the one that's supposed to represent your actual life, the part of the salary that's yours to do something with, that number has a name in economics too. It's called discretionary income. And in most major cities, for most working adults, it has been shrinking every year for the last 2 decades. Not because people are spending more on things they don't need, because the non-discretionary costs, rent, utilities, debt, insurance, have been rising faster than income for long enough that the discretionary part is barely a rounding error. The math you did at that table wasn't a failure of planning. It was an accurate picture of a system that has been quietly redistributing the proceeds of your work upward for a very long time. But let's clear something up. The advice for this situation is always the same. Budget better, track everything, cut what you don't need. And look, some of that helps at the edges. But it's an individual answer to a structural problem. And the scale of the mismatch between the two is genuinely staggering, because the budgeting advice was written for a different ratio. A ratio where housing took 25 to 30% of income, where healthcare wasn't a variable you had to factor into every financial decision, where the fixed costs of a basic life left enough room that personal choices actually moved the needle. That ratio is gone in most cities. The advice stayed. And so there's this strange situation where people are doing everything the advice says, tracking, cutting, optimizing, and still running out of month before they run out of obligations, because the advice assumes a math that no longer exists. Your salary looks big until you pay rent, not because you're doing something wrong. It looks big until you pay rent because it was framed in terms designed to impress, in a world where impressive and sufficient quietly came apart. Here's what they don't tell you. That monthly calculation you do, the one where you move money around and try to make the numbers cooperate and end up staring at what's left thinking, that can't be right. That's not evidence of failure. That's accurate arithmetic in a system that structured itself so the people doing the work capture less and less of what the work actually produces. You're not bad with money. You're doing the math correctly. The math just wasn't set up for you to win. And the distance between what your salary sounds like and what your salary is, the gap between the offer letter number and the number that's left after everything takes its share, that gap is not a reflection of your choices. It's a reflection of whose choices actually determined how this works. So the next time the paycheck lands and the rent goes and you're left doing that math that never resolves, don't start with what you did wrong. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. It handed you a number that felt like a rival, and then arranged things so that the number, once it met your actual life, was just enough to keep you showing up. Now tell me, what's the gap between what your salary sounds like to other people and what it actually feels like to live on? And has anyone ever believed you when you tried to explain it? Drop it in the comments. And if this video finally put words to the math problem you've been blaming yourself for, hit subscribe. We're here every week breaking down the psychology of work that nobody talks about. Because understanding why you are the way you are, that's not just interesting, that's powerful.